Greetings. Ken Woodward here. Welcome back to another episode of Curated Questions. Together, we engage inquisitive humans about how they use questions to navigate and make sense of our world. I'm a fellow traveler and pilgrim on this journey, and I'm glad you're here. Today's conversation is with Miss Jaimie Reese. Jaimie is a former member of the Senior Executive Service, or SES, and spent most of her career with the United States Navy. Jaimie's executive journey spans transformative decades in naval history, from the immediate aftermath of 9/11 through the evolution of modern maritime strategy. As an SES leader, she navigated the unique challenges of driving change within one of the world's largest bureaucracies, where asking the right questions could unlock innovation or expose critical vulnerabilities. Her expertise bridges strategic planning, organizational transformation, and the delicate art of leading through questions in hierarchical systems. She's witnessed firsthand how curiosity operates differently in times of crisis versus calm, and how executive-level questioning can either reinforce or reimagine institutional thinking. Now, as she builds her consultancy, Ms. Reese brings decades of expertise in using questions as tools for both discovery and decision-making at the highest levels of defense leadership. Jaimie, welcome to Curated Questions.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. I always like to kick things off the same way, and that's starting with the question of, when did you first understand the power of questions?
I love your opening question. And believe it or not, I flashed back 30 years to when I started working for the federal government. I was in a training program, and I was a budget person and spent many months reviewing budgets. And I was at the top of the food chain, if you will. And I had never worked for the Department of Defense, Department of Navy. No one in my family had served. So you can imagine all of it was new, right? 21-year-old sitting in the Pentagon, looking at budgets, trying to figure out how people were spending their money, acronyms all over the place. And I had great mentors and teachers. And as we progressed down this budget process, they're like, yeah, ask your questions. Commands have 3 days to respond to you. And so I did. I felt like I was unleashed, right? I was powerful. I could ask questions and people had to explain what was going on. Just as a side note, right, the purpose of kind of a budget review is to ensure that people had the right resources for what they were trying to accomplish. And there was always more needs than there was money. Yep. And so certainly there was a black hat element of, could you find money from people who maybe didn't need as much as they said or had some issues and realign it. So there was always the notion that questions were going to lead to issues that were going to lead to decisions that would reallocate resources. So it was a fundamental first step of the process. There I was, brand new, trying to understand everything, asking a lot of questions. And as we got through this process, that took months, mind you, over the summer, we were all locked away in the Pentagon doing these things. And I'll never forget that I wasn't getting some responses back. And so I called this command that I was working with, and I got a very frustrated leader on the phone who was like, do you know how many questions you've asked? And I'll be honest, I wasn't tracking it. I can't remember the number exactly because this is almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
But he was like, you've asked something like 155 questions in a week, and we can't answer it. And I'll tell you, like, it brought me a lot of humility and like empathy to like, oh my God, what have I done? And so like the thing I remember about that scenario was this conversation where questions are good, but too many questions means you're not going to get answers and you're going to stress the people out that you're asking questions to. And I said, okay, fair. How can I help? And he's like, well, can you prioritize? If you could just prioritize your top 25, like we can get you those answers. Quantity is a quality all of its own, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that was a really powerful conversation that I had really early in my career to understand that if you ask a lot of questions, you may not get the answers you want, but if you can neck it down to those priority things that are really going to be impactful in the decision-making process, it's a win for you and it's a win for the people answering the questions. I just learned a lot and I built a lot of trust with that command by being like, absolutely, and recognizing, okay, yeah, that's a lot. Let me give you these that are the most important. And it formed that relationship. It also taught me that asking questions is a way to build relationships with people, even when they know what my job is. They know my job at that point in time was to try to find money to move around, right?
Yep.
So no one liked that was my job, but they appreciated it, and they appreciated the fact that I could work with them and help us both be successful and not just keep asking questions for the sake of asking questions. That was my first understanding that power, not just of me asking, but also the power that the people have that are responding, and how you have to balance that power between both of us to be successful.
That is, being on both sides of that equation. I understand that. And I appreciate that candid moment of just, you're crushing us here, right?
Right.
Can we prioritize? Let's get the highest level ones first. And it also just reiterates the importance of crafting a good question. And then
Exactly.
I'm just making this up as well, that, okay, out of your 155 questions, 20 years into your career, that's probably been neck down to your top 25 that you would normally just ask straight away, because you've racked and stacked in your own mind, and you've said, this question here will actually answer these other 5 as a result of that.
Yeah, spot on, Ken. Like, I think because I was so new, I had so many questions. And what it also taught me was timing matters, right? If you only have 6 to 8 weeks to do a task, then the other 40 some weeks out of the year, you've got to get up to speed so that you're not asking as many questions. So it taught me also the importance of other ways to get information outside of just the question and answer period, so that you could be more informed, so that when you did ask questions, it was, what are the most pointed questions that you can ask, as opposed to just maybe questions that are more of curiosity, as opposed to directly impacting what it was we were trying to do in the process. No, and it opened my eyes. I already knew I didn't know a lot, right? So
just starting out, right? So this is, there's a learning curve there.
It was my first job, right?
Yeah.
I was 21. What did I know? And so that really helped frame that, because my title was budget analyst, right? Analyst is an important part of that title, right? To be able to analyze, you have to ask good questions, but you also have to have a solid foundation in what you're looking at. And it helped me understand that you had to balance that and find other ways to get informed. And I think it also helped the people that I was working with say, okay, she's interested in knowing more about what we're doing. How do we have her come out to X, Y, or Z, or go to this factory? I think asking those questions and then prioritizing those questions built a lot of trust. And then it enabled me later, as I grew in my ability to review and understand the budget process, it allowed me to really focus in on those questions, the types of questions that I knew were going to get responses germane to the task at hand, right? You ask different questions at different points in processes based on what the outcome is. Right. And you really have to be thoughtful about, is this question germane to that outcome? Because sometimes when you're under time pressure, you can't get it all. You can't get everything in, because you got a little bit of an element of time that's beaten down on you. As someone who probably answered some of those questions in their work career, you can get inundated pretty quickly.
Indeed. And it's all super urgent. So you got to do it now. Right. In that kind of phase of life or work, were there any particular questions that you found just became favorites for you, that either kind of cracked the nut or gave you additional insight, or was it just a broader scope of questions for you?
The most interesting questions, and the ones I would hone in on a lot, were focused on timing. What I learned really quickly as I came to understand this process was the timing of when things were executing, meaning contracts awarding, work being performed, that type of thing, was really the genesis of how you traded money between people, right? If you started a conversation saying, I don't think you need this money, period, that's a different conversation than, hey, maybe you just don't need this right now. What if I could give it to you in 2 years versus 1, right? And so I really focused a lot of my analytical questioning on the timing of when things were happening in a program. There's always schedules. Any good program is managing cost, schedule, and performance. And if you could really work with somebody to understand the timing of those schedules and understanding the steps to get to like a milestone decision or a contract award, that's when, as a budget analyst, you could figure out when did they really need the money, right?
Yep.
And so I really quickly became a really good schedule person to like really question, everybody has pretty schedules. Hey, this is when I'm going to do this, this, and this, whether it's in life or work. And then things happen.
Yep.
And therefore, those things move. And if you can capture and anticipate when those moves are going to happen, you would find that that's when you really could say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we just need to rephase you and have those productive conversations, as opposed to being seen as somebody who was going to just take all your resources. So as I became more analytical, I really focused on contract timing, work timing, in the vernacular of DoD, like milestones, and when were those going to happen, and how were those going to shape a profile of developing something and then producing something. Because challenges happen for people, and everybody wants to be optimistic, right? Everybody's doing their best. Everybody's optimistic about, yes, I said January and I'm going to have that happen in January. And you can really sense like, well, it's July. What are the things you have to do to get to January? And then when they started listing it, it was clear to both of us that that's not going to happen, right? So I think those were the types of questions that really became my bread and butter questions, were based on schedule and how to phase things differently, which again, I think was partially because it was uncomfortable on the idea of I'm just going to take. It was much more comfortable for me to help somebody be successful and ask questions that would enable them to be successful with just maybe a different way of funding something. Might not make sense unless you've done budget work in life too. Like, all right, how do I plan out my finances in a way that allows me to be successful and pay no bill before it's time, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I learned about how to ask really good questions that would help the department make better choices about when something needed funding, as opposed to whether or not something needed funding. I always felt like, I don't know that that's my decision. I'm not a warfighter, whether or not something needs to be acquired. But what I can do is make sure that people have the money in the right place at the right time to enable success. And that's really important to me. I think you'll, maybe not too shocking to you, but I'm really about partnering for success, whether that's through trust, through accountability. I want people to be successful. And so my questions became more about how can we work together to be successful? And that was really important to me. That was just part of my value stream of, I'm not here to do the illustrious, take somebody's resources and kill something. I'm here to help make sure people and programs are successful. Because at the end of the day, that's what the mission needs, right? The mission needs capability. So yeah, that's some of the stuff I learned.
How were questions a part of the conversation on the requirements side? We know the inner workings of how these things work, but some of the folks may not completely understand. Right. So we've got the warfighter, the people on the front lines are saying, yes, we need some kind of capability that gets fleeted up through the requirements side. And then funding comes, or those things get funded, and there's a whole battle. Everything gets racked and stacked. And then there's another part of the DoD that is off executing on that to go make that happen, which I think is where many of those conversations were happening, where you were asking those questions and trying to come back. But then you have these conversations with the activities that are out there trying to do the execution, trying to get the contracts in place and all that. But then after you have those conversations and it's like, okay, we know that things are going to slide. Now I'm assuming you're now turning to the requirements folks in the building and saying, I think things need to shift, or based on, based on this. So now you're pushing back and you're telling the warfighter, you may just be the honest broker in it, right? By saying, you're not going to get this year. We're going to need to push this out, following year. How might questions have been a part of that conversation? Because the warfighters, we want to get them what they need, but now we're saying it's not going to happen as quickly. How might those conversations go in?
Yeah, I think that was an evolution, right? So as I think about my career, right, I spent the first decade doing budget analysis work, and I did different programs. And so as I grew and in my knowledge of programs and could like get into portfolios, what's interesting is some of the questions became more about, well, do we have the requirement? I found myself having a louder voice, almost advocating for the program manager with the requirements community at times, saying, wait a minute, we can be successful here in a different way, right? Do we need X, Y, Z, or do you just need X and Y? What's the most important thing? And I think, honestly, a lot of times in acquisition programs, people don't want to push back on that requirement, right? People don't want to say, because you want to deliver the warfighter everything you need. This is a very timely question because the DoD is about to refocus on speed over everything else. And speed means you trade off requirements. It's like managing your house, right? You can walk around your house on any given day and be like, yes, I'd like to remodel that bathroom and kitchen and this. But at the same time, maybe that requirement's overshot. Like, maybe I'll just put up some wallpaper.
Yep.
And so as I matured in understanding what my role was, I was able to help be an advocate to say, hey, if we don't change this money and profile is going to be at risk. And so let's figure out how we can not have this be at risk. If I fast forward many, many years into my career, almost 25 years after this first experience I'm talking about, that was my job as the Deputy Assistant Secretary. It was acquisition policy. It was partnering with programs to help them be successful and say, wait a minute, we're coming up on a milestone. Do you have everything you need? How can we modify X, Y, or Z, a strategy or a policy or funding profile or requirement, right? It was bringing those stakeholders together to help look at things in a different way. And to your point about questions were a really important part of that process, because a lot of times as the non-engineer in the room or the non-technical person in the room, my questions were very different. It was, I hear you, but how risky is that? How could we drive risk out of something? And how could we maybe meet a requirement differently? Or can you alter this requirement? I signed off on a lot of cost estimates. And sometimes in that cost estimating process, a lot of times questions weren't being asked. Assumptions were made about the requirements, which would feed all these documents that would help you understand the cost estimate. Well, if you didn't start asking questions at the beginning of that estimating process to say, wait a minute, you really think you're going to sustain this on 2 coasts with 2 training schools and 2 this? And often the question was, well, yes, like that's not realistic. So I felt like I could use a lot of my experience from my early days of seeing how programs struggled to like really shape how to help programs be successful. And to your point about requirements, a lot of times the warfighter's thinking, I want all of these things. And if you said, back to my prioritization question, if you said, well, which of these things are the most important? Because I might be able to get you this one thing in 12 months, or it's going to take me 3 years to get you all 3 things. They'd say, oh, well, this one thing is the most important, and you could deliver that faster. And so questions to me enable you to have those discussions more fruitfully and understand where there's trade-offs in a situation. Whereas if you just took it at face value to say the warfighter needs X, Y, Z, and you just took that at face value and never engaged with that warfighter to really understand if they need X, Y, Z all at the same time, you might be taking too long to deliver something. And so I think a lot of my experience in those early years, getting involved in understanding programs and how they followed schedules and what drove schedules, what drove requirements, and then being in the Pentagon, brokering a lot of those things between the requirements community, the acquisition community, and the financial community could be a success. Early on in my career, I'll tell you, Ken, there was an aviation program that had a lot of tragic testing accidents. And it was in my portfolio. A lot of discussion about, do they cancel it? Do they not? And again, I was not at the table for those discussions, right? Those were at the most senior levels. But when those discussions were made, my job wasn't then to go back and just decide what I thought their funding profile should be. I really became a partner with that program manager, and we spent countless hours figuring out, based on the decisions that were being made, how could he reshape an entire production, development, and test program. And then I helped, and then I actually went with him to the Hill to do a reprogramming and help him be successful. And I'll tell you, that was one of the most rewarding times. It was a terrible incident, many terrible incidents where many people died. And so being able to ask the questions and understand what was the decisions being made and how those could translate into money and schedule, and build that with a program manager, and then go with that program manager to help be successful, whether it was with DOD at the time or Congress, really was one of those key moments that made me stick with my role in the Department of Navy. I really enjoyed that. And throughout that entire time, it was a lot of just conversational questions about, what if we did it like this? Could you do it like, how would this work? What if we put money here? Would that solve this itch? Or just always using the question mindset to crowdsource. Hey, well, what about this? How does this one look? What if we think about it this way? And then I think when you do that, and you do that in partnership with people, you come up with really awesome outcomes.
I appreciate that, because I just have my own little viewfinder clicking through different things that I've experienced. Yeah. And that partnership can make the working environment just better, but then also still being able to get something delivered to the fleet.
Right.
Now, you had mentioned at one point you're not being the technical person in the room, but you've got your particular background. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about how the diversity of voices in the room and bringing these different questions, can you talk a little bit about how that's functioned for you and what you've seen there?
Yeah, I am a big believer, even if it's a little unpopular right now, that having a diverse set of people in a room is going to get you a better answer. Partially not just because I always felt like I was the non-engineer in the room, but I got to see where you get stronger outcomes when you have a contracting person, a finance person, a programmatic person, all come together, because each of us is going to answer questions and come up with questions differently. And sometimes just hearing someone talk about something that wasn't even in you have those biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And being able to have people with different backgrounds and experiences come together. On the DoD, they call them integrated product teams, but in any forum, whether it's a working group, of an IPT forum, whatever the label is, having those people come in with those kind of unconscious biases and experiences to shape a solution set, I think is invaluable. And I saw it time and time again. People were more successful when they had those people at the table. And I'll tell you, I also saw it on the back end. I would literally be in meetings sometimes, and there would be a program team briefing the highest level. This was before I was an executive. I'd be there, they'd be briefing an executive or flag officer or general officer, and they'd talk about the contracting strategy. And then someone would say to them, well, where's your contracting officer? Is that feasible, what you just talked about? And it was like deer in headlights. And they'd be like, no. And I would be sitting there like, are you guys serious right now? Like, guys, and I'm from New York. I say guys, that's not a gender term. I just is a New York term. And I'd be like, this whole time you've been talking about this and your contracting officer doesn't have a voice, right? And so I think I saw that fail so many times. You know, that helped me ask questions when I was doing budget work, or later when I was in a program office. Hey, who else needs to be in the room? Who else needs to be part of this discussion that maybe we're not thinking about? Sometimes that was people doing logistics and sustainment, right? You've got to understand the ecosystem when you're making decisions and leading a team or running a program, right? Because if you keep asking the same questions to the same people, you're going to get the same answers. And if you don't have these other stakeholders involved, you're going to keep getting that same answer. And sometimes that's the hardest thing about change, is finding a different answer and understanding it and going with it, because you get used to what you get used to. And sometimes I think people fear questions, because that means if I ask questions in a way that get me different answers, I might have to change. And change is hard, especially if you're somebody who thinks, I've done this before, I know what I'm doing, I'm an engineer, I'm a this, I'm a that. But if you've got everybody sitting around a table, you can find some really unique experiences that contribute to different outcomes, because they're going to answer questions differently, and they're going to provide a different viewpoint to maybe someone who is saying one thing. Now you have to have a trusting environment, right? I think anytime you're asking a lot of questions that are disruptive or provocative, you have to have that safe environment for people to not just ask the questions, but be able to answer the questions. So whenever you bring those diverse environments together, I think it's really important that you establish some ground rules about the safety of the discussion and the people involved in the discussion. But I'll tell you, as the non-technical person, I was often faced with just a lot of, you don't know what you're talking about.
Mm.
Obviously that was hard, but sometimes you also were like, okay, well, we can do it your way, but then these things are going to happen, right? You're going to lose money to Congress, or you're not going to be able to get to this mile, and so sometimes I found that the best outcome was to let people do what they needed to do, and then when that didn't work how they thought, they'd be like, okay, well, let's come back and revisit. Like, you kind of thought these things might happen, and that's not a classic you were right, but it was like, look, if you're going to push back on me this much about how to maybe do this, then let's go do it your way, and then let's learn from that, because I've had enough experience doing budget work that I know this about Congress is going to see your program, and it's not going to go well. And so maybe that sounds a little cruel, but sometimes if you get a lot of pushback, you got to pick your battles sometimes. And sometimes it worked out for them, but a lot of times some of that expertise I had of 10, 15 years working with Congress and seeing how they treated programs when you didn't have your stuff in a bag, you might want to listen. So
Experience does
and I
mean
don't say that
something.
because I know everything, but that experience is valuable, right? You may be the best engineer and know the most there is to know about software, but if you don't know how to put a program together and go talk to congressional staff, you're not going to get money. If you don't get money, you really don't get much. I think you have to have that runtime, and I think the more you can partner with people and help them be successful, the more they don't look at the differences. One of the things I say really a lot is we got to focus on why we're similar. We spend a lot of time talking about why people are different, right? Well, you're an engineer, you're an HR person, but if we start conversations and start asking questions based on what do we all have in common, I think you can get more powerful answers in that kind of environment and take the shields down and have a more positive outcome.
And was that kind of one of your strategies for creating a safe space initially for folks to be able to engage with questions? And then were there any other tips, tricks, or strategies that you used to help construct that safe space?
Absolutely. I think that was paramount to a lot of the work I've done over the years, was creating that safe space. Being transparent is, I think, a really good way to make sure that you're creating a safe space for people to help with. Setting up some ground rules. If we were doing a budget drill, it was like, hey, look, you can either work with me and we can come through something, or someone else in the department's going to reach out and they're not going to give you the opportunity. Trying to get ahead of things and really partner with people and incentivizing them maybe is a way to say it, of, hey, if we can do this, you can get ahead of XYZ. And wouldn't that be more beneficial? So I always tried to focus on the positive, and creating a safe space to me was a little bit about, hey, here's the positive win. With that program I was talking about that was really struggling, it was, hey, I'm not here to beat you up. You're getting your butt kicked by 10 other people in the department. I'm here to help you be successful. So you got to let me in a little bit so I can help you be successful. A lot of times stating your intentions and being transparent to say, look, these things are going to happen and we can either shape it and I can help you shape it, or you're going to just fall victim to a lot of other people helping you make decisions that aren't going to be as informed. That was one way I created a lot of safe space for people, especially in those early years. Later, as I started doing more managing and leading teams, just getting to know people not just when there was a problem, but getting to know them all the time, I think really does create a safe environment. If you reach out to somebody only when there's a problem, that doesn't work. That in my experience, that doesn't work, because then the questions they ask you, they're suspicious. Well, why are you reaching out to me? I only hear from you when there's a problem, right? If you don't build relationships along the way, your ability to really influence what's happening, it's a little diminished, and you're going to have a hard time. Let's face it, a lot of times, a lot of things have problems. It's good. It's how you learn, right? But if you don't have relationships along the way and bring in those stakeholders early in the process or touch points throughout the year, you create an environment where they're less likely to help you. When I was the DAS and people would be talking about a strategy, I'm like, okay, well, you should reach out and see if you can talk to Congress about what you're doing. They're like, oh, why would I want to tell Congress what I'm doing? I'm like, because you need their buy-in. And they're like, we can't do that. Or OSD, or, name the kind of oversight group.
Yeah.
Or, hey, you're about to award this contract, right? We're coming up on a milestone. You have a really funny incentive structure. You should talk to FMB about me. Like, this is like a budget group. So sorry, I got a little bit
Gotcha.
acronym-y there.
Yeah.
But if you don't talk to some budget people about this contract strategy and the way the payments are made, they're going to ding you later on execution. So why don't you bring them in, make sure they know what's happening so that they can be your first line of defense when something's happening. And man, there was resistance in doing that. I think time is a big part of why there's sometimes resistance. Oh, I have to go talk to another group of people. But if you can do that and you build those relationships, then you always will have a safe space to go talk to people. It's so much easier to say, hey, remember when I talked to you about this a few months ago? Well, now this has changed and we probably need to revisit some of that. Can you help me with that? People respond well when those types of conversations happen, as opposed to, well, I never told you about this. Yeah, it's really different. It's really unusual. And now it's gone left. And now I need your help. People aren't inclined to help when you do it like that. And so I think really the key to building a safe space is building relationships continuously and not just expecting someone to catch up with you when something goes wrong and then to help you at that point. So that's been my approach, is creating those relationships continuously so that when you do need someone's help for whatever reason, you have those relationships and they know a little bit about you and a little bit about what you're about. And so then I think it's easier for people to come together and solve hard problems.
As you were describing that, what clicked for me was that most of the time that I talk about creating a safe space, I'm thinking about my peers and the organizations that I'm overseeing, right? Or I'm more senior to, right?
Yeah.
But as you're describing that, it expands that to say, okay, how am I creating a safe space upward to the more senior folks? Whether they're intentional about it or not is almost irrelevant because the individuals are going to be who they're going to be.
Yeah.
But if it's okay, how do I create a safe space? So let's say that there's, and I'm obviously making this up, if there is a boss that they're an extreme introvert, so they're not out walking the floor or connecting with people, then perhaps knowing that you want to create a safe space with them, then it's intentionally engaging with them in the kitchenette, or around the water cooler, whatever, or any opportunity that you get, not even so much to tell them about your program or what you're working on, but it's because you're developing a relationship also, but it's that I want to create a safe space. That is the goal. So now whenever the time comes, we've got that. And it'll also be easier for them because now they can take credit for, hey, I created the safe space for this to happen. When in actuality, it was you leaning forward to go do that action.
Yeah, it creates a win-win when you have those relationships. And I think a lot of times when organizations struggle, it's exactly what you just said, Ken. You're down and in. If in a bureaucracy, you are not thinking about up and out, that does not work. In a hierarchical organization, you have to know who you need to talk to and when, and you have to create those relationships continuously. One thing I hope to do as a consultant is to help people who maybe have been down and in and don't know who to talk to or how to do that. Because if you don't understand the processes or the people, and obviously I'm not going to give them inside baseball, but you've got to know who are those stakeholders that maybe are non-traditional, but are people who are going to have an equity somewhere in this bureaucracy and be making a choice about a program, a workforce or whatever. And you have to build those relationships. That's to me, the secret of a safe space is continual engagement up and out with maybe some non-traditional stakeholders. Yeah. Too much down and in. Too much down and in, and there's no growth.
Yeah. Well, the temptation is just so strong because within, for whatever program project that I'm working on, it's like, I'm trying to meet the goals. I'm trying to execute cost, schedule, performance. I'm trying to execute and manage the problems and all of that. And it just takes so much resistance to the gravity that's pulling you down to say, okay, no, I I need to block out the afternoon to go talk to whomever or get on their calendar,
Yeah.
whatever, just to establish that, because just the gravity that pulls you in of, yep,
Hmm.
I've got the PowerPoint project that I've got to work on to brief out and do the weekly briefs or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we were talking about this engagement and where you're headed with the curated questions, one of the things I was thinking about is how important time is to both developing good questions and answering the questions. And in a society where we are so crunched for time, it's our most precious resource. And therefore, that like crushes you on your ability to ask really good questions because you don't have the time. Being thoughtful takes time. Being analytical takes time. Building relationships takes time. And in a society where people feel like they can't even go to the bathroom without carrying their cell phone, time is a precious commodity. And who knows, maybe AI is going to get some of that time back for people because it'll take things off their plate. I don't know. I don't know if I pressed the I believe button on that yet or not. But to ask really good questions and to be thoughtful and analytical about the responses, it's just time. And man, we're pressed for time. Even when you think you're going to have time, you don't. As someone who's gone through this transition and headed into kind of early retirement, which isn't really retirement, it's just the transition to a next phase. You know, I constantly think about time because I don't know how I was doing this, right? I have 2 small kids. I have an elderly mother. I am not bored. My days are filled. And I was like, how was I also working 60 hours a week? I really do spend a lot of time, ironically, thinking about time management because I think we've lost that. People are working from home all the time. That's the biggest thing after COVID is that people who were high performers before are now killing themselves at home working and they don't turn off their computer.
Yeah.
Right? They are working harder than ever. A lot of things that are happening right now, and I'll keep that really generic, but it's actually taking more time. It's not being more efficient. It's actually creating more time sucks on things than ever before and with less people, right? I really look back to my initial story with you when we had a budget review that lasted months and months. You know, they do that now in like 2 weeks.
Really?
It took us from Memorial Day to Labor Day, the budget process.
Yeah.
When I started, right, I lost every summer in my 20s. I wasn't at Dewey Beach with all my friends, right? I was working because from Memorial Day to Labor Day,
Yeah.
now they do that same process in like 2 to 3 weeks, right? Because other things have crept in and eaten into that time. Think about what's going on right now. Think about the time being lost with the shutdown of a government, whether you're government or support to government. That's going to take time to recover from. And when you're rushed or when you feel like you've got too much to do, like you said, you're down and in, you're so focused on the right now, you can't pull your head up and ask good questions and understand the context to what's happening or, you know, whatever the case is. So I think that we got to really work on time management and helping people with time management and how to create time and space to be thoughtful and analytical. And I think curated questions are a great part of that, right? To be thoughtful and analytical, you have to ask questions. No one just wakes up one day knowing everything. You know, maybe someday, maybe someday, but you know, time's hard.
Kevin Kelly, I love quoting this, where he was on the podcast and he had mentioned that AI was always driving us to the middle. And he's like, most questions are bad or just ineffective. And so it takes a while to get to, you know, you've got to get through a bunch of crappy questions to get to the good questions. And so we can, if we think that we're going to default to AI to do that, it's like, well, AI will give you assurance that this is the right answer. It doesn't play. It doesn't do iterations on its own. It's just going to deliver it to you. And it's driving towards the middle. So our ability to ask the better questions that are going to drive us out to innovative solutions, that's on us. And so if that's on us and we don't give any time to it, future is not bright on that front. That's not something we can necessarily outsource.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I just think so much of, I think it's society. You know, there's a lot of reasons, right? My kids have sporting activities both days of the weekend. When I was growing up, that wasn't how we did it. You didn't have those pressures, maybe on Saturdays, but you didn't have practices on Sundays or, travel leagues. So yeah, I think technology, whether it's AI or just phones. I was talking to somebody who's like, oh, well, I usually have my phone in the shower in case someone needs to talk to me. And I was like, what? First of all, like maybe right now because my mom's sick, I have the phone really close to me. But like on a general day, I don't ever need to worry if the person on the other end of the phone is in the shower, right? That is not a question I'm going to start a conversation with. Like, hey, Ken, are you in the shower? Or do you have time to talk? Not even in my list of questions. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I, like
But
legitimately.
yeah, maybe it should be. It should be.
There is, I have no responsibility in my life that requires me to have a phone in the shower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't, yeah, but it goes back to what you're talking about and just how much, just this whole conversation about when you're pressed for time and being pulled in multiple directions all the time, it's really hard to be thoughtful and to ask the right things because you're just moving so fast. But if you don't slow down, right? What is it, Ferris Bueller, right? If you don't slow down a little bit, you got to slow down a little bit. A gentleman that I worked with for several years, the old slow is smooth and smooth is fast. If you really think about that, it's telling you you got to stop and slow down, ask good questions, figure out the answers, and then you can go quick. But I think we reverse it, right? We don't want slow, we don't want smooth, we just want fast. I don't know if that's a win or not. So time will tell.
As you were talking about earlier, it's cost, schedule, and performance. And it's like, nope, you don't get all three. This is a you pick two thing, and the other one's going to take the brunt of that decision. If you want it fast, okay, great, but it's not going to be cheap or your schedule's going to slip, one of the two.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of your listeners, like I said, maybe listen a lot about buying things and acquiring things, but if you really use a cost, schedule, performance lens, you can use that on anything you do. I use that in my human capital. Managing people from hire to retire is about cost, schedule, and performance. How much does it cost me to get them in? Am I getting them in on time? Are they staying? Right? How long do I anticipate them staying? And are they able to perform? And so no matter what you do in life, there's a cost, schedule, performance element, no matter what it is, right? My husband's a handyman. Cost, schedule, performance, hands down, rules his life. And he's like, what? I'm like, it does. Let me tell you, right? And so I bring that lens to a lot of my tasks, whether it's professional or just life, personal experiences. I bring that cost, schedule, performance lens to a lot of what I do. And it's funny, it's just ingrained in me. But that's how I really approached human capital stuff, was with that same lens. And that's not how typical HR personnel, because they're so transactional, right? That's such a challenging profession. And even though it's a personal relationship when you're hiring somebody, it's very transaction based. And if you take a step back, right, strategically, when you're managing a workforce or you're managing a team, you got to manage the cost, schedule, performance of the teammates or the workforce at large. And how do you measure performance of a workforce, right? There's a lot of ways to do that, qualitative, quantitative, but you've got to bring that same lens. So maybe that helps some of the listeners understand a little bit about why that's important, how you can take that cost, schedule, performance part of our discussion and really think about that in whatever you do. Because no matter, if you think about it, those are usually your three trade-offs. I can go with the cheap guy to do my siding, but if I want it to last 20 years, maybe that's not the best. Maybe that's not the best answer. So.
Right. Yeah. It's a handy universal rubric in order to see the world and kind of execute life with. Yeah. Because those are a lot of the questions that I would be asking in the work or at home. How are questions a part of that human capital? Because you were leading the HR piece for NAVC, which was roughly 80,000 people. How are questions a part of your mindset in caring for and thinking about that entire staff? Because that's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. It was a lot of people. Wow, where to start on answering your good question there. So at the end of the day, anytime you're talking about a workforce, whether it's 35 people or 35,000 people, it's, do you have the right people in the right place at the right time? I think that's a fundamental way to approach that. And it leverages that cost schedule performance. To me, it was always trying to find a balanced approach. And it was looking at all the facets from how do we acquire talent? How do we create a pipeline? How do we develop talent? And then how do we ensure that talent is in the right place, right? As programs change. And it is hard to balance all of those things. And it's also hard because when you try to look at the aggregate, you really can't. You've got to break it down a little bit, and you've got to find ways to break down the workforce in meaningful ways, as opposed to just treating it as a 35 or 80,000 person, right?
Yeah.
80,000 people included blue collar shipyard workers and high end engineers at a warfare center doing incredible things. So I think you have to figure out how you balance both across the spectrum from acquiring to the talent of somebody's career, and really think what are the most meaningful strategies you can have that will influence the most people. I will tell you, one of the hardest things about some of the changes that have happened in, I'll just say, the last year, was that you ended up spending the majority of your time on like 1% of the workforce.
Mm.
And that threw you out of balance, because in a finite world of resources, when you were spending that much time and energy on 1%, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You start missing the other 99%. And so that was one of the things I really tried to, not to lose sight of the other 99%. How you do that, to me, it was always just about not trying to tackle everything, but what are those big problems that we have, right? If acquiring talent is a big problem in this space, then how do we do that differently, right? If developing talent is a piece of this, what can we do differently in that space? When we're working with a huge workforce like that, you've got to eat that elephant one bite at a time, because if you try to solve all the problems of everybody in the workforce, you'll never get there.
Yeah.
And so what I tried to really do was help just like, what are those really big strategies and what are the big problems we need to get after? And everybody had a different opinion on that. I think that was one of the hardest jobs. Everybody had a different opinion on that. We would have survey data that would say it's this one thing, but a lot of times the discussion was, well, we don't want to use the data. I just know in my gut, my workforce is having this issue. Okay.
Wow.
So you had to do a lot of collaboration, but you really tried to always get back. I always tried to get back to, well, what does the data show us about what are some of the biggest things? Where are we really impacting mission? And where are there outcomes that we need a strategy to alter? Where is that value proposition where we can get at the biggest problems for the biggest part of the workforce?
Yeah.
And tried to go after those things, because you just didn't have the capacity to tackle every single problem. I think the other way I approached that was really thinking through not just the short term, but the long term. I think a lot of times when it comes to business processes, whether it's HR, FM, contracts, you are so focused on the near term, you lose sight of the long term. And so the other way I tried to approach things was, hey, if we move this, can I sustain that in the long term? And I tried to have a little bit of a longer term view. I think that helps you understand risk better, right?
Okay.
Short-term and long-term risk. And I think that one of the successes was, hey, it's great if I fix this, but I can't sustain that. And so I don't know that I want to fix this if I can't sustain it. So maybe I should spend time on this part so that I can increase this, right? I don't want to bring in more talent if I don't have the budget to pay that many more people, right? Or if I want to change how we do leadership development, I've got to think about whether or not I have the right people to sustain a different leadership type of program. So I think bringing a balanced approach and looking both across the continuum, but also from a time, what is a long-term versus a short-term strategy. You can crush it. You can turn on an HR community to process transactions for a little bit, but in the long term, if you don't have the people to sustain that workforce and the managers to sustain that workforce, that's not a win. And as far as I was concerned, strategically, that's not a win, right? If I can bring in more people, but at the end of the day, I don't have the tools on how to develop them or understand how they're performing, why would I do that? Right? Then I just have more people that get upset and mad. So It was a lot of balancing and asking different questions. It wasn't about transactions. It was about how do we partner and how do we think differently and how do we really try to get at a broader subset of the workforce. Those were some of the approaches I used to try to manage that big of a number. It's a big number, right? As we said before, right? Quantity is a quality all of its own. And you had to rely on people. You had to really rely and trust and empower people to be successful. I couldn't be down micromanaging the HR community, different pockets of other leaders who had big workforces. You just had to set the direction and enable success and be able to measure. A lot of times we forget the measurement piece, and that's really important. Because if you're not measuring and you're not thinking about what to measure, I don't know if you're winning.
Yeah, so on that measuring piece,
Mm-hmm.
how did you think about that? And what were questions that perhaps you even used with yourself in noodling through? Okay, new job, right? Taking on new role,
Mm-hmm.
or new pieces, or things get broken apart and then put back together, whatever. How did questions come into play through that process for you?
First, I had a really good team, and we had a lot of data. And I would honestly tell you, Ken, it was too much data.
Yeah.
You can have too much data because then you start realizing that the data doesn't match, or it tells you different things, or maybe it's not the right data. The way I tried to approach the measuring piece was, first of all, start with what were some just fundamental basic things that anybody doing human capital management should measure, right? How long does it take to hire? How many people are in training? Like, just get some like really foundational measurements that we already had. And then let's talk about, were those good or not? If you make it, sometimes I feel like if you make it really, if you over engineer it with data, you might miss some of these quick wins. I had an amazing data team that was really good at coming up with different ways to look at measurements, right? You can measure attrition all you want, but what's good or bad, right? How many people should be leaving, right? Well, it depends on the age of your workforce, the type of work they're doing, right? It's really hard to say what attrition looks like. And sometimes, right, there's good attrition when it's a really good idea for that person to no longer be in that job and you both part ways and everybody wins. One of the things we started asking about, how do we look at that differently? And the team came up. And so I really leveraged their knowledge of the data and really asked questions about, well, how can we look at this differently? Or what aren't we bringing into this discussion that's related to these metrics? And we've come up with different things like, it was the team that came up with, well, let's measure early attrition. That's interesting. Okay, yeah, let's see who's leaving in 6 months or 12 months, because we all just spent a lot of money bringing somebody in. And if they leave in 6 months and that number's tracking high, maybe we've got a problem with there to peel into, right?
Yeah.
So I think you got to let data lead you down a path, but then you have to have the courage to go figure out the why. And that's where the kind of questions came in, with asking questions differently about, well, why are these people leaving? They would have exit interviews and like, was that really why they were leaving? Let's make sure we're engaging with them ahead of them deciding to leave. I think part of that journey there was, there's so much data, we can't look at everything, but let's find those like key performance indicators that if we could move would really help us, right? If I could just change, and I'll mess up the numbers here, but hey, if I could just knock my attrition down by 5%, that would mean my HR community has to do like 10% less transactions, right?
Right.
And so thinking about numbers from the volume standpoint and thinking about metrics that would help you make different decisions about where you source, how workload is sourced, was one of the approaches that I used. Because just looking at that data, if you try to bring the lens and ask the questions of, if we were to knock down this number, what other things in the ecosystem would benefit from that? And that helped us make decisions about what to measure, just because you were looking at that differently, right? I wasn't just trying to solve that problem. If that was a problem, I was really trying to look at it as, hey, if I change this attribute, where do I get benefit elsewhere in the system, right? If I'm in a constrained resource environment,
right,
how do I free up time and resources by just changing a number here or there? I think one of the most interesting conversations was getting people to look at the data like that. A classic example of that is when it comes to, and I think this is probably true in a lot of, not just in the federal government, but people want to hire their own people. No, this person's going to be on my team. Okay, but then I'm hiring, like literally I have 50 hiring actions for the exact same person. Oh no, it's not the exact same person. They'd be here on the blue team and that person would be on the red team. And those people don't do the same thing. But hey, you know what? They do the same thing, right? Pretty much, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the big things that I really tried to push was moving away from a la carte transactions to doing things collectively, because when I started looking at the metrics, no one had actually looked at how many transactions we were doing to hire in a year. That wasn't the metric. The metric was the time. The metric hadn't been the number. And so when I started looking at volume, I came up with a different a different solution set, because to me, the problem wasn't that it was taking me too long to hire. The problem was that I had too much volume on a constrained set of resources. So if I could knock that volume down, then I thought that will naturally knock the time down. That was how I approached a lot of my problem sets was, hey, maybe we're not looking at this right. I can't just look at this. What I should maybe look at is volume. Also, like, looked at what else was causing workload on the human resources community. No one had ever been measuring what other things they do outside of hiring. Oh my gosh, there were a lot of things.
There's a lot of things.
How do we change that process? I share those because that was the way I looked at the data. We weren't making enough headway. And so I was like, well, I can't keep looking at the data the same way. I have to find different ways to look at the data. What aren't we looking at? And spitballing that with the team and helping them, asking a lot of questions like, well, what do you do in a day? What do you do in a day? Well, I spend time on this, this, and this. And there's a lot of places for waste, but then they'd say, oh, and then I spend time doing this. Wait, you're doing that too? I didn't know you did that. Oh, and you do that and you do that? Well, why don't we do that centrally? Or why don't I pull that off the plate of this community? So I think that was a lot of the ways I tried to drive some change by just saying, hey, we can't keep looking at these same metrics over and over. It's going to kill us and it's not getting us where we want to be. And asking those questions about what aren't we looking at? What else is driving your workload? What else could we do that if I just changed this number 1% would have a huge impact on the volume and the workload of people? And I did that no matter, it wasn't just with the human capital, anything that I had in my portfolio. That was how I tried to approach it, right? What is my facilities team spending the most time on? Does that make sense? Is there a different way to do that? Instead of just measuring whether or not toilets are fixed, that's not the measurement, right? It's how do I get to a different things to look at? And I think that's the advantage when you come into an organization, you just have fresh eyes. I'll share with you, and I think it's important to the conversation about curated questions and what I shared earlier in my career. I really like to move around a lot. Now I'll tell you, when you're trying to recreate your career, you get a little lost sometimes. I was like, wait, when was I there? Because I moved jobs every 3 years for 30 years.
Wow.
Right? That's a lot of different jobs in a lot of different organizations.
It is.
And so I had to be really comfortable asking a lot of questions, because certainly they were usually in the same technical arena or subject area. They were all different. Even if I stayed within an organization, one day I was doing shipbuilding, the next day I was doing working capital fund rates, different parts of a portfolio. And sometimes the questions you asked about shipbuilding worked in this other, replace the noun, but a lot of times it didn't. And so I had to pull on my experiences to be able to be successful in those new kind of subject areas, in the new jobs, and think about, all right, well, what are some things that I knew from here that I could apply here? But a lot of times it was night and day. And I just had to ask questions. And I was never a bull in a china shop when I would make those transitions.
Yeah.
Because you're in a bureaucracy. They will wait you out. Right? So you have to really be deliberate and get the lay of the land. I tried really hard not to listen to the chatter before I went into a job. People, oh, well, these people or this, I would have a general sense of what was working and what wasn't working, but I was really I tried to stay away from the drama, because I wanted my questions to be sincere and helpful in what I wanted to accomplish. A lot of times people want to come in, my first 100 days, we're going to do this, this, and this. And Maybe inadvertently I was doing the slow is smooth, smooth is fast. But if you go in with those biases, people will, and you start asking questions that have a little bit of a bias, people know, like, oh, well, you talk to this person, or you talk to, oh, they must be talking to these people about X, Y, or Z. And I never wanted to have that, because I felt it was always important that if I was asking a question, it was my question, not someone else's question. And I think that's important, an important way to build trust with your teams or the organizations you lead. They've got to be coming from you. And if they're not, right there, you're going to start eroding trust with your people, because they'll know. Like, the only way she'll know to ask that question is she must have talked to so-and-so.
Yeah.
Their craft, that's a hard position to be in. And if you're going to ask those types of questions, you should say, hey, this person was talking about this. Can you help me understand why they would say that? That's an entirely fair way to ask a question, but not pretend it's your question. I don't think that's a good way to lead teams. But because I moved around a fair amount, I had to be really comfortable. I had to quickly draw my own conclusions to figure out what are those problems I want to tackle, and how can I be most helpful to this workforce. Sometimes just asking the workforce what they need help with is one of the most powerful questions, right? How can I help? How can I help you be successful? And I don't think we ask that enough.
Yeah. Now, in those transitions, as you said, that you're coming in with your questions and the things that you want to accomplish. As you're just mentioning, also talking to the workforce, understanding the folks that have been there doing this job for 10, 15 years, they know the skeletons, they know where the things that need to get fixed. How is it that you would think about when you're going into a new job, or you've been talking with leadership about taking on a new role? How did you think about what you wanted to do, or what you wanted to accomplish? What was that process like for you?
Yeah.
To even consider how you would come up with that solution or that vision?
Yeah. It became intuitive after a while. It's a hard question to answer. I think a couple things. First of all, we've said this word, like bureaucracy and hierarchies. What is the role of the organization, right? What is their key mission set? And are we meeting those key mission sets? And so I really did try to focus on what were those things that we could control, and what was the outcome that this organization was supposed to deliver for the command or the entity.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, a lot of times there were differing views on that. Okay, what is this group supposed to be doing? And they're like, and everybody has a boss. So if you were going to a new job, like, okay, what do you think this group should be doing? And they'd say something, and then I'd go ask the team, well, what do you guys think your job is? Well, we think it's this. And surprising number of times, those were not the same thing.
Wow.
So then that became a different conversation. Or one was answering me in the to be, and one was answering me as is. And so sometimes when you ask questions like, what do you think this organization should be doing? They were really talking about what they wanted me to get the organization to do.
That's true.
And so sometimes you had to clarify, like, okay, are you talking about what we're doing today, or what you need this organization to be doing a year from now? And sometimes I get at answering the question of, is what my organization's doing today what you want them to be doing in a year? And a lot of times the answer was no. I became a master of changing organizations in my executive role. Leading change is a huge part of being an executive. I think it's still part of the rubric. I don't know. I haven't checked recently, but leading change is a huge part of being, and whether you're a chief operating officer, a chief executive officer, whatever it is, if you're a leader, change is constant.
Yeah.
And what I found is a lot of times people were unsatisfied with what was happening, and they were trying to get you to change something without telling you that they wanted to change something. So you'd have to pick up those pieces and figure out, all right, wait, all right, are they talking about what's been happening? I think anytime a leader switches out, it's an opportunity to revisit.
Sure.
Right? That's a good time to revisit whether or not the organization is performing well. And a lot of times I would start with those questions about what is it that are the key functions, and how are we doing against those key functions? And if there was a mismatch, documenting it and thinking about how do we get after that? What are things that we're doing that maybe we're not supposed to be doing? Just because over time, right? Over time, you had the guy or girl who maybe knew that. And so everyone was still coming to them, even though that wasn't their job anymore.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people in organizations have lived through that. And so I think I started there. Where are we in the process? What processes do we own? What processes do we touch? And trying to really focus in on the main mission sets and bringing expertise to those main mission sets. And sometimes you found that you didn't have expertise in the main mission sets. And so then it became a discussion about managing talent, right? If I needed more people who knew acquisition policy or knew earned value management, whatever the thing was, then it became, well, how do I get there? What do I need to do to get those resources in the right place? Do I upskill somebody? Do I find them a different job? Do I have the room in my manpower to get after that? And so it was a lot of work, a lot of people and workforce assessments. Certainly tools play a big part in creating successful outcomes, like understanding what are the tools people use, how can you enhance those? That seems to be a big win when you come into an organization. Like, do you have the tools you need to be successful? And a lot of people have never asked that question. And that can be, and when someone says no, there's an aha moment buried there. Like, what do you mean? You're being asked to do this and you don't have any of the tools, or you don't have the access, or whatever the reason for the no. And then solving that can be a game changing. All right, let's work on getting you access to that. Right? You're a contracting officer representative. You've never taken a class. All right, let's get you trained on that.
Get you going on that.
Let's get you going on that if that's your job. So, so I think there was always an element of the, to your broader question of when you're going into an organization, right? There was always a broader element of getting to know the workforce, understanding what their key mission sets are, and making some assessments about whether or not there was alignment there. And obviously in larger organizations, right? When I walked into a job with 150 people that were direct staff, I wasn't doing that with all 150 people, right?
Yeah.
I was starting with the first 10 in the circle, and then we'd branch out once we figured out that, right? I think the other key is not to always believe the first story you hear from your team. And I think questions are a big part of that. If you're talking to your team about a mission set and, oh, this is what we do and we do it really well. I got really good at asking questions like, well, who would agree with that statement? Who would say you're doing this well? Who wouldn't? And those types of questions could reveal a lot. I asked that a lot. Who would agree that you guys are really good at this? Who would agree you're not? Who would say you're not?
Yeah.
And sometimes that was well, no one would disagree with that statement. Really?
No one?
Come on, like no one's awesome. Like, we're not that awesome. No one's that awesome. Trying to make sure that you didn't jump too quickly to conclusions, and making sure that you're doing a little due diligence on okay, if they say they're really good at this, let's see how they know they're good at something, right? How do you know you're good at this? Do we have a transaction time? How do you measure your performance? Well, we don't measure it. We just know we're good at it. Okay, well, if you had to measure it, how would you measure it? I think there's just a lot of, to your point, there's a lot of, you had to build good, trusting environments to be able to ask those questions without them feeling threatened.
Yeah.
Well, how would you measure it? Okay, have you thought about measuring it? What's the barrier to measuring it? Maybe we should try measuring it. How would we do that? But letting them answer and then come up with that was really important. Because if you walked into an organization and say, okay, my last job, we did this, this, and this. You guys are going to do this, this, and this. I just never thought that was, having been on the other side of that, I never thought that was fun.
Yeah.
Let me come up with a way to measure what I'm doing. Let me have a voice in that process. And so I think that's how I approached some of those transitions and understanding what needed to be done as a leader in those organizations. So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully I answered that question, Ken.
I certainly think so. But I think in that example, it's coming back to this building trust, right? Building space for that trust to be able to get it to be established, for folks to be able to have the freedom and feel safe that they can share whatever that whatever that is.
Yeah. 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 And Ken, you are totally picking up, because when I've been using a coach for the last couple of years. I never thought I needed one. I was like, well, sure, if they're offering it, I'll try it. And it has been fantastic. And one of the first things I did with a coach was build a value wheel. And oh my God, first thing on that wheel for me is trust. I have to trust my team and they need to trust me. And then I have to trust the organization I work for. And so I share that because of two things. When you're talking about building trust with the team, it doesn't mean you give them a pass. I think a lot of times people think, well, if you have a trusting relationship with your team, you don't hold them accountable. 100% incorrect. When you have a trusting environment, it is exactly to hold each other accountable. It's exactly to have the ability to have a conversation that said, hey, this isn't going well. How do we get after this together, right? And knowing that you give some grace there, but there's accountability in trust. I think a lot of people think that there's not accountability in trust. I am completely in the other camp. That is how you drive accountability. Hey, I trusted you to have this outcome, and I just found out that that didn't happen. Help me understand why that didn't happen, because that can't happen again. And if it does happen again, there's a consequence to that, right? And then they have to trust me that I'm going to give them all the information I can give them to be successful. And if I don't do that, then that's on me, that I'm accountable to them. And so I share that because I think a lot of people don't think that trust and accountability go hand in hand, but in my world they do. But that is my biggest value in the workplace, is trust. And when you've worked in situations where you don't have that yourself, then you need to make a change. And I'll be honest, that was one of the reasons why I made a change in the last year, was because I didn't have the same level of trust in everything that was happening. Yeah. And that kept me up at night. And that drove me to be unhappy. And that drove me to worry. And that is not a sustainable feeling. And when you don't have that trust, I think it's okay to look in the mirror and say, I need to make a change. At least for me, that's what I found. I don't mean that in my direct. I had an amazing bosses, amazing teams, but sometimes that trust can be with a larger organization or with just things that, outside of your direct chain. But for me, when that trust isn't there, that is really a big deal for me. Because I'm trusting you with 60 hours of my week. I'm trusting that you, the organization, is going to take care of me and do what's best for me as well as you, right? Yeah. Again, not just me, but you as an organization are going to do what's best for the organization and me, right? But at the end of the day, if I'm giving you all this time and energy and missing X, Y, or Z to be here, I got to know that you're going to have my back too. And if that starts to erode, that's hard. I flip back when we were years ago doing sequestration, right? When people lost pay, man, there was a lot of trust broken. Yeah. Especially because at the time, a lot of people didn't think that was needed. There was enough money. There was a lot of people who said there was enough money. We didn't need to do that. And you broke trust with a lot of the workforce. And I saw a lot of people leave at that point because they didn't trust that people had their best interest in mind. And so when it starts happening to you and you feel, wait a minute, maybe that trust isn't there, it's okay to start thinking about making changes. At least for me, it was. So.
Yeah, I did a podcast episode on my decision to accept the DRP, the delayed resignation program, and leave the federal workforce. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was that email, the fork in the road email that came out in January. There was a line in there that talked about increased scrutiny or increased requirements for trust and loyalty. And having worked for the government and the Navy for over 30 years, either active duty, contractor, or federal service, I'm like, done. Those two lines in that email is what broke my trust. I was just like, okay, I'm done. And had to do something different. So
that's probably why you picked up on me saying it a lot, right? As if that's one of your high values. But I think a lot of us, right? That's just, I think, a natural human need is you've got to trust, right? You got to trust your spouse. You got to trust your friends. You've got to trust. And that can mean different things, right? People,
Absolutely.
for some people, the use of those phrases was even more of a, yep, I'm in it. I'm in it. Other times you can read things and have a different view of how that trust is being interpreted. So it's I think how you define trust can be a very personal journey. So,
yep. And along those lines, this was a Ken Woodward decision. This was not any judgment for or against anybody else. And everybody has all of their own circumstances. So it's like, okay, how do you define that? And so what is the right decision for you? All right, go off and execute. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to ask yourself a lot of questions, right? Anytime you, like you just talked about, after all the years of service, right, when you're faced with a decision like that, that's maybe a little bit unexpected, right? How do you even know you're asking yourself the right questions to make the decision? And sometimes it just comes down to whether or not, I think my husband just looked at me one day and he's like, "You're so unhappy." And I was like, "Yeah, I know." And he's like, "Well," I was like, "Yeah, but our family structure is one where I'm the primary breadwinner."
Yeah.
And so he's like, "It's not worth it if you're this unhappy." And that was a good reality check from a spouse. Sometimes you need that like kick in the teeth from friends or families who are like, "You're just miserable. Like, you want to keep doing this? Because maybe it's time to do something else." And so for me, that kind of question, look at myself in the mirror being like, am I happy? I've done a lot of things in my career. I served 9/11 in the Pentagon, sequestration, right? There's been a lot of ups and downs in my career, but I don't know that I was ever unhappy. And I think I say this to people, like, you don't go home, no matter if you work in private industry, in a lab, wherever you work, no one goes home every day saying, "Oh my God, my organization makes all the right decisions every moment of every day. I couldn't be more in love with my organization. Everything they do is magical and wonderful." If that is your job and you're listening to this podcast, congratulations. Don't ever leave.
You won the lottery.
But I don't think that's everybody's world, right? But when you get to the point that you're more and more unhappy with those choices, you got to do some soul searching and ask yourself some questions about whether or not that's the right thing for you anymore, right? It's a good self-reflection moment to be like, oh, okay, is this where I want to be? And if you look at that and say, yeah, for these reasons, I want to stay, put yourself into it. But if you want to make that change, sometimes you got to be brave and ask yourself the question of, all right, well, what's going to make me happy? Because I don't know, I think all of us show up and do our best when we're happy and content and we're not worried or not sleeping, right? I think that's when you do your best, and you need people that when you show up at work are doing their best. And sometimes I think if you can't, you should really think about whether or not you should be doing that anymore. And it's hard, right? Yeah, after 30 years, those of us who are a certain age, teaching an old dog new tricks is hard. It's really hard. But, you want to show up and do your best. And if there's things that are distracting you from doing that, then, be brave and make a different choice, because it'll be all right. You'll get there. I got to believe that. I do believe that.
But you're pivoting a little bit, and not so much about choice, but about being brave. You'd mentioned the 9/11 attacks, and
yeah,
I personally hadn't heard the story before. Wanted to pull the string on that a little bit to understand what your experience was now 25 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can take this in a couple different directions. Certainly that morning we were in the office. We had just moved back into the renovated wing in the Pentagon in the fourth quarter. I can't even remember how long we've been back, but it hadn't been too long. They had just started Pentagon renovation. And so we were in that first wedge to move back in. And I was in the wedge that literally looked out over the old helipad. So like my boss's office on the E-ring looked out. We were on the fourth floor, and everybody's TV had the news on. And even though my boss was in her office, her EA had turned on the TV. And we started getting calls about the Trade Center. And so a couple of us, we were in the office looking, and all of us were like, wow, I don't feel good about it. Like, this is what is happening, right? And we were all back at our desks, and you just felt this huge explosion. To this day, nowhere in my mind was that a plane hitting the building. But you saw the flashes and you heard the alarms go off, and man, we were a mixed office of civilian and military. And man, those military leaders just jumped into action, right? Okay, everybody evacuate. Don't grab your stuff. Let's just get out. And we didn't do a lot of fire drills or anything back then. And so one of the most important stories, I think, was a lot of us went into the stairwell. Well, the Pentagon stairwells were designed that once you were in them, you could only get out on the bottom floor. On 9/11, that wasn't a good choice because that's where like the plane had come in and the bottom floors were the worst, right? And so we almost all got stuck in the stairwell. So then we all had to retreat back up, and people from the first and second floor were trying to get out of the first floor or coming up the stairwell. So I'll never forget that. Never design a building where you can only get out on the first floor. Doesn't work. So then, leaving the building, it was just chaos. None of us really knew what had happened. But I was so impressed with the military leaders who really just accounted for everybody, went through the office, just damage control was what they were focused on.
Yeah.
So you get out in the courtyard and you can tell like half the building, it's only like the people on our side of the building, right? Like people are coming in the courtyard, like, why are you guys all out here? And then you started seeing some of the people who were really badly burned. I can still see that. And then they're shepherding us out to the parking lot. And it was just sheer panic. And fortunately, when I left that stairwell and I was like running back to the office to out the main door, I ran by my cubicle and I grabbed my purse. So I had my car keys. So I was able to take some people back to the house, and we just were all there stunned until like the rest of the day when we could finally get people home at 8 or 9 at night. But all the things that I remember about that day, like you couldn't make calls. Like my parents had no idea if I was okay. Yes, okay. It's hard. So fast forward, it's a couple days after the attacks, and you could go back in the Pentagon to get your stuff because we were high enough up that our floor was still you could get to it, even though it was really badly burnt. And there was, foam over things. And I'll never forget the smell of jet fuel to this day. The smell of jet fuel triggers a lot of emotions about how it smelled in the Pentagon after 9/11. And then, and I can't even remember how many days later, it was like, okay, well, we're going to go to Crystal City. Command had just moved out of Crystal City, and they're like, we got to get back to work. You got these new offices, and it was like chaos, right? These had been offices that people hadn't maintained. The carpeting was horrible. They were just finding anything to make a desk, and we all showed up like that next week. I can't even tell you what day it was. And my boss at the time was awesome. She was calling everybody, making sure we were okay, talking to us about showing back up, really being caring. And I think my immediate organization was really good. But the story I shared was on my blog that I do. The story I shared was about, I'll just say, the head of the organization at a very senior level on the political side. We'd maybe been there a couple days, and this person was coming over to, I guess, talk to us, see the spaces. So of course we're all waiting, and it's hard to explain. Like it was like a big open room with a lot of desks. So like when you walk through the door, you could see everybody. And he's being escorted by a flag officer, and a very caring flag officer, really strong leader. And he comes in and he goes, oh, says to this political, like, this is this group. This is what they're working on right now, because right after 9/11, we needed more money, and we're doing a supplemental budget request, all those things that none of us had ever done. You're like, what are we doing? All right, who needs what, right? And so he comes in and he just stands there. And I think even the flag officer was like trying to get him to say something. And he just kind of looked at all of us and then turned around and left. If he said anything, it does not register with me. If it was anything, it was a couple like short words. It wasn't a motivational speech. It wasn't, I'm so glad you guys are here. And we were all just like in shock. And I'll just never forget it, because I was like, wow, you can be in a high position and have no leadership skills whatsoever. And I think I'll talk a lot about, you learn things from good leaders, but you also learn a lot of things from bad leaders. And that experience resonated. Like I said, maybe other people remember that differently, but I just remember expecting him to say things and be motivational and be caring and show something. And if he said anything, like I said, it was a short sentence and then left. And wow, like it just left such an impression about how high up you can be and be a really bad leader. In those days, that being said, we did budget stuff. We were trying to ascertain, what do we need in a supplemental, right? How do we get what we need to go now fight this war on terrorism? And I'll tell you, it was a really interesting time. I shared earlier in our conversation that a lot of that was about taking people's money. And so you were asking hard questions to try to find places to realign resources. What I remember about this time was it wasn't about that. It was, what do you need? What else do you need? Right? We weren't trying to move money around. We were going to get extra money.
Yeah.
And so the types of questions you asked were very different. It was, hey, what capabilities do we need? What do our warfighters need? What can we do quickly? And so I felt like it was a very different time because it wasn't, you didn't have that pressure of scarce resources.
Yeah. It was almost the opposite.
It was the opposite. And you knew you were going to get a lot of resources. All of us still, like, how is this going to work? What are we going to do? How long are we going to be here? And you just had to rely on each other because there weren't answers to any of those questions. We could ask the best questions. We didn't have an answer. I don't think the nation had an answer. Yeah. Certainly you had responses and strategies being developed. But I think we also just learned to lean on each other in ways that enabled us to get through it. There weren't people coming in with dogs to pet. I don't remember there being like a civilian employee assistance line to call. We just all had to lean on each other and just figure it out, right? There was no roadmap. There was a lot of just camaraderie and team building that had to happen to get through the day and keep us all moving forward. So it was a really interesting, obviously a crazy time in the nation, crazy time in the world, but to be trying to figure out how to translate that stuff into budget requirements and show up and keep moving forward. I think that just built a lot of resiliency that you don't know you have until you're faced with that kind of situation. And you learned who was a good leader, right? Like I said, my boss from day one, she was calling, she was engaging, and I got to see the glimpse of, oh, wow, they're not all like that. Okay, noted. Right? If I'm ever leading, you got to show you care. Like, good Lord, especially in that type of situation. So, yeah.
Wow.
It was hard. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing what happened and then also the lessons.
Yeah. And I'd go back to, would I have still been doing this, right, if that didn't happen? And I don't know. I stayed 30 years as a civilian, and that happened really early in my career. And I go back to thinking, like, would I have stayed and kept doing this if we didn't have that shared experience and shared mission set? I don't know. Maybe, but it's interesting to think about the feelings that came with that kind of significant event as compared to maybe other significant events in the career when they happen. Some get you to stay, some get you to change.
Yeah.
And so it's always interesting to juxtapose certain things that happen and how that influences your decision-making process.
Yeah, such a galvanizing moment for you to really, not that you weren't before, but really to commit to the mission, right? Because you hadn't been on the front lines until the front lines kind of came to you. Yeah.
Well put.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I know that we're just need to head towards wrapping up. It's amazing the time has flown by.
I know.
I do like to ask folks about what their right now question is. So this is beyond what's for dinner and who am I going to get married, if I'm going to get married kind of questions, those big questions. And this is more about what questions you're working with today, question or questions. Yeah. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about questions with health. I always say I'm a proud card-carrying member of the sandwich generation, right? I take care of mom. and she's been in the hospital now for 9 or 10 days. And I think I'm good at asking questions until I'm talking to a lot of doctors. I'm not a science person, but what I will tell you is a lot of the questions on my mind are around her care and like what's best for her to recover. And, honestly, it could be a lot worse. She's got some mobility issues happening. And at a certain age, there's always other issues, right? Cardiology issues and things like that are all intertwined. But a lot of the questions that I've been asking in the last week and a half have been in areas I just don't know much about, right? But it's questions to help clarify. I think whenever you're a patient and you've got a lot of doctors and a good care team, you're still only probably getting half at best of what they're talking about. Yeah. And so I think that confusion sets in. So I found that the best questions I'm asking right now are things to help my mom understand what they're saying. So a lot of like, hey, you just said this. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or yesterday you talked about doing this, but today you're not talking about that. What has changed? And so I can't ask a lot of medical questions, right? Because I don't know anything about that. But what I can do is try to use prompts that gets the doctor or nurse to explain something to my mom and I in a way that is a little bit more understandable. Because it's hard day by day. Things happen and then things change course. Trying to also focus on what are the next steps. A lot of the questions are, what are the next steps? Who's making what decision? Like, when are we going to revisit her time to leave? Or when are we going to do X, Y, or Z? But it's really hard. Like, when you're in those situations, it's overload of information, overload of tests. My brother has access to her medical, for ANOVA, they use MyChart. He pulls out the notes and puts them into one of the AI tools so we can understand what the doctors are saying, which is a great use of an AI tool.
Absolutely.
And it allows me to kind of ask them, okay, yeah, that kind of ties. This doctor was saying this. Okay, now I understand that note. Maybe I should ask about this. So a lot of my questions right now are just trying to understand and make sure that there's continuity in care, right? When you're in the hospital that long, you have different nurses every day, different. Yeah. Those are the questions on my mind. When we finish this recording, heading back over to the hospital to see how she's doing today. And you have to really ask patients, particularly if they're elderly, a lot of questions about how they're feeling. Because if you just say, okay, how are you doing today? Oh, pretty good. Okay. Did you eat lunch? I didn't like the soup they brought. It kind of tasted funky. Okay. Well, what else did you have? All right. Can I go get you a snack? Right. Like making sure they're eating. Yeah. Making sure, I'll just say, processes are happening.
Body is functioning. Yes. Yeah.
Have you done this lately? Or because I think when you're the patient, or at least what I've seen in my experience is the patient, they feel like they're bothering people by telling them things. And I think we all feel that way. You don't like to unload everything on your friends, right? You keep a lot of things inside. Yeah. And I think when you're a patient, it's really hard for you to understand what is information you should share and what isn't. And so sometimes I feel like I'm just asking her questions to be able to say, well, you know what, have you talked to the doctor about that? Next time the nurse comes in, let's make sure we write that down or we bring that up or, so I feel like I'm asking a million questions, but then, and I think it was, then when you leave, you're like, oh, why didn't I ask this? Yeah. You're like kicking yourself, but you just don't know. And it's hard to know because you've got a lot of different things going on in a hospital. So I don't know, maybe that was a little vague, but those are the questions in my mind. Like, okay, how are you feeling? What are the next steps? And when do we make certain decisions about going to a rehab or coming home or a surgery or whatever the case is? But I'll tell you, being present is so important in a hospital situation because I can tell you some of the things that we've been able to accomplish the last couple of days took me being present 5 or 6 hours a day. And that's hard, right? When you've got other things, right? We talked about time management, right? Fortunately, right now, I have the capacity to do that. Yeah. And I remember before my dad passed and he was in the hospital a couple of times, I learned that same lesson. I just share that because I think it's really important. The way you have to be there to ask the questions And it's really hard when you've got a lot of different priorities. And I'm hoping a lot of folks aren't afraid to say to an employer, hey, I've got somebody in the hospital. I need to go be with them, because that's how you get really good medical care, is by being present and advocating and asking questions. There's great medical providers, and sometimes you just need to really be there to share the right information, that something you might think isn't important is really important from a medical standpoint, and you don't know it.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, oh, well, you mean like this symptom could have been this? Yes. Have you had that before? Or no, your mom shouldn't have been having electrolytes. Like, no, you can't like give her Gator. Oh, okay. Good to know. So you have all these little things, and being present is really important, because it enables you to ask the questions and get answers and understand what's changed in how they're answering questions from day to day. So,
yeah, those changing questions and what's not being asked versus being asked, and how that's changed. Yeah,
right. A lot of my questions are well, we talked about this. We're not doing that now. Help me understand why. And sometimes the doctors, after a couple days, know what I'm going to ask, and I could see them explaining things differently because they know I was going to be there and keep asking questions. So I feel like after a couple of days with the same doctor, he knew what I was going to ask and say. So it was good.
All those skills as a junior budget analyst are coming back to serve your mom today, and all of the experiences over the career.
Yeah, right? Cost, schedule, and performance.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the schedule? I'm focusing on schedule. So maybe I should be focused on cost. We'll find out when we get the bill. I don't know.
Hoping that insurance will cover the lion's share of that.
I don't know what Medicare. Yeah, we'll see. So, but yeah, those are the questions on my mind. I mean, on top of like, is the government going to reopen? Am I going to have heat in my house? It's been 3 weeks. Lots of other questions, but the most critical questions right now are about mom and her care and how she's feeling and how we're going to keep progressing. So. Yeah. Wow.
That is truly a right now question. That is very pressing. And you're in the midst of it right now.
Yep. But you know what? It's awesome to be able to do it.
Yeah. Absolute privilege, right? Yeah. Beautiful. So as we do head towards wrapping up here, where is the best place for folks to reach out to you, connect with you, hear what you're excited about, and be able to have those conversations?
Yeah. So a couple ways. I'm on LinkedIn. I also did start an LLC, so resereimagined.com. I have a blog on there, or you can contact me through the website. So blog is some things on my mind, maybe some of the same things I've touched upon here. But yeah, reach out on LinkedIn is a great way. I do check the messages there frequently, or through the website are two really good ways to engage. And I'd love to hear from people. I love helping people, and I'd love to hear if someone has any thoughts or questions, or this has helped them. I'd love that feedback. I live for feedback.
Indeed. Feedback is a gift. And as long as I've known you and the things that we've had a chance to work on, you've always been very approachable and open to that free dialogue, which I've been very, very grateful for. And I'm excited about this next phase for you as well, as you build up this consultancy. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a nice opportunity to figure out what I want to do next and get some insight into roles and positions and career fields that maybe I didn't know existed. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to keep asking good questions and have a little bit of a different say on what I want to work on, and still contribute and still help people be successful and still serve the public. At my heart, both my parents were teachers. I think public service is just in my blood. So I just want to do it maybe from a little bit of a different viewpoint. So
it's a beautiful thing. Well, thank you for bringing all the questioning experience here and being a part of the Curated Questions community. I thank you.
All right. It was great talking to you. All the best in your endeavor. And I'm excited to see where Curated Questions goes in the next year.
Beautiful.